And we also have small booklets that we give out, and we ask them and explain to them to use the booklets, and every time they go on a new job, this is mostly for the day laborers and the construction workers, to write down the first and last name of their employer, the license plate number of the car that they are being driven in, the name of the agency. Some agencies have roofing, names or whatnot. If they can get information like the cell phone number, the business address of the employer, write down the address where they're working, if they're working in people's homes. What other information am I missing?
The hours they were working?
Correct. That type of information we use mostly as for preventative reasons. So we ask them to always get that information at first, because if something happens and we want to take legal measures, we want to begin to claim claim the money back that might have been denied. Okay. We use the address in order to send a demand letter to their to the offices of the employer. Or we can look up information about the employer. We can even go to the Department of Labor to see if other claims have been made against this employer. I think targeting employers who have repeatedly been exploiting workers is really important, especially if we're going to go into the Department of Labor. They like to see a case where there's not just one individual who was exploited once last year for a week, but they want to see, they want to see the big guys,
So basically, as a preventative measure, workers can, use, your members obviously get this booklet ready-made for them, but any worker can really keep track of
that information. And we also want to make it a really important point that the information, asking for that information when you start your job, and I've had a lot of clients when I explain to them to use these books, they are hesitant because they feel like that person who's picking them up on the corner doesn't want to give them that information, and they will just pick someone else up who doesn't ask for it. So it's really hard we're trying to do a lot of organizing at NICE to really change the way immigrants are well, it's hard to reach that many people, but essentially creating a new pattern so that immigrants are all demanding this, and or workers, I should say, are all demanding this.
I know from my experience working with day laborers that letting workers know that if an employer doesn't want to give you that information, it's a reason to think twice about going to work with that employer.
Absolutely. Yeah.
With respect to the record keeping, I think one thing I've seen when I actually go with people to small claims court is that workers need to actually write the date that they worked, like the month, the day, and the year, because many times even workers who keep records might just write the day of the week, but then when you actually are showing that to a judge, that day of the week doesn't tell them really when that work was performed, and so it's having the date and the hours and the amounts that they were paid is just really important. And actually representing day laborers in court, I see that a lot of times in court, a lot of times in court it can be slow, which is why it's so great that organizations like NICE are doing this community work, because court can be a very slow process. But if you don't have the records, when you actually go to court, it's very difficult to remember what you did on a particular day, even 6 months ago. So it's just very important to protect themselves, and even being able to show that record to your employer might mean that your employer might pay you without you even having to go to court.
Say someone is in this kind of situation where their employer, we all hear these stories, right, where a worker, is owed 2 weeks or a month or more in wages that their employer just kept saying, we'll pay you later, can't pay you yet, and it never comes. Or if a worker really is entitled to overtime pay and, their employer refuses to do that, what can someone do in this kind of situation when it's really, in some cases, their word against their employer? Obviously, if they have these records, it'll help them, but how does this actually play out? What does a worker do? What should they do?
Well, at NICE, workers come to our office with this concern, and what we're doing now is getting them, we've formed a group, which is a Comité de Trabajadores, and this group is working together, basically looking for solutions to just exactly what you're saying. So they collectively look for solutions, and it really depends on the situation. It depends on how many records they have of the employer. They do the investigation and the research in terms of where does this employer work and who is he, and we do have legal help from MFY and other legal services agencies at, advising us on what the laws are and how we can sort of threaten maybe the employers with certain legal actions.
So there are networks of community groups as well as legal services, meaning free attorneys that are experts in this area that could give people advice, right, and help them through the process of filing a claim in court and so forth.
I mean, I think it's not only day laborers that experience this issue, but other workers as well. And for instance, I've seen it with home health care workers, domestic workers, where their employer might always be behind. And my first advice would be, let your employer know that you know they're behind and say, I can come by on this day to pick up my check. So attempt to push them. Now, I understand different workers, for some people it's going to be hard to do that. And that is where MFY, we're available as a free legal service provider to assist people with pursuing these claims with their employers. And there's other legal services providers in New York as well.
An aspect of this that really concerns me, because I'm a social worker, is just really creating a support network for these workers and really giving them the opportunity to help each other so that they don't feel no longer isolated and maybe feeling like there's these types of things are only happening to them. And that's the type of service that we're trying to provide, and then also like looking at it more humanly in terms of getting the money back isn't the only problem. It's really just empowering this community group and these community members to create a more life-affirming experience in terms of their work.
Well, so that one of the things that that raises for me, and something we were talking about before we started the show, is how does this all? We're talking about rights that workers have regardless of their immigration status, right? So you have a right to the wages that you worked for. So even if you're working without papers and you're not authorized, once you've done the job, your employer is obligated to pay you. There's lots of other examples, right?
That's right. I mean, it's a common misconception, not only for employees, but also some employers think that because somebody's undocumented, that they don't have the same rights as other workers. But for the most part, the worker protection laws in the United States apply irrespective of immigration status. You have the same right to minimum wage, you have the same right to overtime, you have the same right to be free of discrimination, you have the same right to work in a safe workplace. Those laws apply no matter what your immigration status is. And workers are going to court, they're negotiating with their employers, they're working with community organizations, and they are asserting these rights and winning.